You won't believe what just happened. A general just struck a private across the face in front of 300 soldiers. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent mess hall. Everyone froze. Trays stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. And the private, she didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. She just stood there, absolutely still, like she'd been through worse than anything this room could throw at her. What nobody knew, not the general, not the watching soldiers, not even the instructors who'd trained her for months, was that this quiet, overlooked woman was about to rewrite everything they thought they understood about strength. Before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe so you never miss powerful stories like this one, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from today. Let me tell you about Private Avery Maddox, 27 years old, barely 5'4", always standing slightly behind the formation line. Not enough to get called out, just enough to blend into the background like wallpaper. Her personnel file read like a disaster waiting to happen. Bottom 5% in timed runs, barely scraping minimum scores on weapons qualification. Instructors wrote things like works hard and teachable, which is code for Chitrice, but she'll never really make it. Everything about her screamed mediocrity. Her uniform always seemed half a size too big. Her boots were polished with obsessive care. But she never volunteered for anything, never raised her hand, never stepped forward when they needed demonstrations. One soldier joked she could stand between two flags and disappear into the stitching. Another whispered she was just paperwork waiting to happen. Not cruel, just predictive. Her platoon treated her like someone you protect, not someone you depend on. The kind of soldier you tell to hang back during the tough stuff, because you can't afford mistakes. Everyone assumed her silence meant insecurity, that her careful movements meant hesitation, that her preference for staying invisible meant she lacked confidence. But here's the thing about assumptions. Sometimes they're not just wrong. Sometimes they're dangerously, catastrophically backwards. There were signs. Small ones, the kind only trained eyes would catch. During an evening meal rotation, someone dropped a stack of metal plates. The crash rang out like an explosion. Most soldiers jumped or turned their heads. Avery didn't flinch, but she did shift. Her weight transferred to the ball of her right foot. Her shoulders dropped into a ready position. Her eyes scanned directionally instead of just reacting emotionally. It lasted maybe half a second. Just muscle memory leaking through the cracks of her carefully constructed disguise. During weapons cleaning days, she worked alone, while others chatted and wasted time. She moved with exact precision, locking bolt groups in perfect sequences, rotating the cleaning cloth so no contaminated edge touched clean metal. It was unnecessary precision, almost obsessive, but her breathing slowed during that task. Her posture straightened, like her body remembered this process from somewhere more serious than basic training. And late one night, in the gym with the lights off, except for the emergency strips near the floor, she practiced alone. Inside wrist breaks, subtle hip rotations, redirected pressure techniques, takedown sequences, recovery stances. No sound, no bag impacts, no dramatic exertion, just quiet, controlled repetition. The kind someone does when they're maintaining skills, not learning them for the first time. Someone saw her through the glass door window, just briefly. They didn't say anything, but that moment registered somewhere in the back of their mind like a question mark they couldn't quite articulate. Now, General Marcus Halverson was the kind of officer who believed standards were slipping, that the modern military had gone soft, that accommodation and compassion were destroying combat effectiveness. And when he looked at Avery Maddox, he saw everything he believed was wrong with the system. A weak link, a diversity hire, someone the institution was bending itself around instead of demanding she rise to the standard. He made it his mission to prove she didn't belong. The first real confrontation happened during a land navigation assessment. The platoon moved along a ridgeline, rucks packed, compasses out. Avery walked near the back as usual, pack straps digging into his shoulders. Her partner, Specialist Tyler Griggs, kept glancing over, clearly worried she'd collapse. He offered to take some of her weight. She politely declined. Up on a small rise, Halverson stood with binoculars, tracking the formation. His gaze settled on Avery lagging a few yards behind. He handed the binoculars to his major and said simply, "There. Back row, that one." They watched as she maintained her measured pace, never panicking, never sprinting to catch up. Just steady. Barely enough to finish, never enough to impress. Halverson scribbled harsh notes into his leather portfolio. Down below, Sergeant Diaz checked his watch, and his temper flared. "Maddox, move it. This is a test, not a nature walk." The words carried across the hillside. Heads turned. Avery simply nodded once. "Roger, Sergeant." Her breath was steady. She closed the gap just enough to satisfy the standard. Nothing more. Nothing more. When they reached the rally point, Diaz singled her out in front of everyone. "Every second we lose is on you. You know that, right?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied, expression completely unreadable. No excuses, no frustration, just that same quiet acceptance that somehow made people feel guilty without understanding why. The second crack came during a live stress simulation. Alarms blaring, smoke machines pumping artificial haze, red lights strobing. The scenario called for rapid movement under simulated fire. A casualty mannequin lay in the open with sensors ticking down time. Avery knew the drill forwards and backwards. She'd run versions of this in places where the smoke was on Vake and the blood was on rubber dye. But here, in this training room, she hesitated deliberately. She froze in the doorway, letting her hands look uncertain. She took a beat too long to respond when her teammates shouted at her. That beat was enough for the simulator to register additional casualties. Indicators flashed. Lost lives appeared on the screen. "God, Maddox," someone yelled. "We lost 3 because you locked up." In the observation booth above, Halverson stood with arms folded, watching through the glass. On the playback monitor, the freeze frame showed Avery standing in the doorway while the clock drained seconds away. "There," he said, pointing. "That hesitation. That's what kills you in the real world." Down on the floor, Avery accepted every word of the critique without protest. "Understood, Sergeant," she said quietly. Internally, she replayed every motion, every angle, every sound. Her mind didn't blame herself for losing 3 simulated lives. Her mind remembered nights when the lives at stake weren't simulated at all. The third crack came during the final company PT test. Dawn broke over Fort Redwood with pale orange light. The company lined up on the track, commanders watching, stopwatches ready. General Halverson stood at the far end near the finish line, arms behind his back, expression carved from stone. When the whistle blew, the company surged forward. Avery started at the back, stride smooth but intentionally short. She could have moved up, she felt it in her legs, that familiar burn from missions and timed infiltrations, but she dropped her focus slightly, let her breathing sound heavier than it was, let the distance between her and the front widen. A few soldiers noticed. Specialist Griggs glanced over his shoulder, saw her falling behind, and instinctively slowed his own pace. Others near him did the same. They didn't call out to her, they just refused to leave her alone at the rear. Dolberson, that quiet loyalty was an insult. He watched as half a dozen otherwise fit soldiers sacrificed their lap times to keep Avery from looking like she was struggling alone. To him, it was a disease spreading through the ranks. Compassion where there should be ruthless standards. Avery crossed the finish line just barely above the failing mark. Soldiers who'd slowed for her finished within seconds, some clapping her on the shoulder. "Nice work, Maddox." She nodded simply. "Thanks." Halverson's jaw clenched. It turned the Hawaii, anger simmering, and signaled for the company to assemble in the main hallway. As the formation lined up, Avery took her usual spot near the back, blending in like always. Then Halverson stepped into the hallway, boots striking the floor with deliberate force that made every head turn. His eyes scanned the rows until they landed on her. Maddox. Front and center. She walked forward calmly, stopping exactly where regulation required. Halverson closed the distance, the difference in height and rank making the space feel like a courtroom. "Do you think this army owes you protection?" he asked, voice loud enough to bounce off the walls. Avery held her gaze just below his chin, exactly where regulation dictated. "No, sir," she said softly. The answer quiet, clean, honest did something strange to the room. A few soldiers let out nervous laughs, unsure if she was being naive or brave. Halverson heard the ripple and hated it. He didn't want humor. He wanted shame. Her lack of emotional reaction irritated him more than tears ever could have. He stared at her a moment longer, then stepped back and addressed the entire formation. This is not a charity. You are not here to bend standards around whoever is struggling the most. Avery quietly stepped back into formation when dismissed, returning to her place at the rear as if nothing had changed. But something had. The distance between what Halverson believed a soldier should be and what Avery actually was had just widened into something dangerous. Now, while all this was happening on the surface, other people were starting to notice things that didn't add up. Staff Sergeant Elena March stood near the equipment cage one afternoon, organizing gear returns. Her eyes drifted toward the far bench where Avery sat alone, wrapping her wrists. But the way she wrapped them was wrong. Not wrong in form wrong for someone who supposedly barely passed combative's qualification. The tape wasn't standard athletic strip. It was braided cloth, interwoven in a pattern March had only seen once before, during an instructor assignment years back. Only high-level close-quarters operators used it because it didn't tear under torque. Avery pulled the tape tight, anchored it, then folded it inward across the joint. Marsh watched longer than she meant to. That kind of wrap wasn't taught at Fort Redwood. It was taught in places where losing control meant dying faster. During range day, strong crosswinds pushed against the firing tables. Avery stepped into position and paused, watching the wind flag. The line instructor, Sergeant Finch, walked past when Avery spoke quietly. "Sir, angle your shoulder. The wind isn't pushing left, it's folding onto itself." Finch frowned, assuming she was mixing terms. "Just focus on your fundamentals." "Maddox." She nodded. "Yes, sir." Later, when reviewing target patterns, Finch saw the strange drift initial left, then sharp correction right. Avery's observation had been spot on, but she hadn't corrected her own shots. Hadn't proven anything. She let her grouping remain just passable. Finch stared at the paper target and whispered almost to himself, "How did she see that?" In the medical wing, during a routine vitals check, the nurse lifted Avery's collar slightly to attach the stethoscope and paused. Just above the clavicle rested a thin scar, perfectly symmetrical, healed in a surgical line. Not jagged, not from an accident. The kind of incision found only in trauma, stabilization, or high-risk field extractions. "Burn?" the nurse asked lightly, though she already knew it wasn't. "No, ma'am," Avery replied. The nurse studied her eyes, waiting for context. None came. Avery just lifted her collar back into position. "You don't earn a scar like that from training accidents, and you don't carry it at 27 without a story." Rumors began forming. Not loudly, not directly, but soldiers have a way of identifying what doesn't fit. During uniform inspection, a senior enlisted with 30 years behind him noticed something faint near Avery's Rista faded training serial, printed on fabric tape, worn to almost nothing. He knew the sequence immediately. Not regular platoon numbering. Not exercise labeling. He'd seen it only once during a cross-branch exchange with a classified combatives detachment. He didn't confront her. Didn't ask questions. He just stared at her wrist a little longer than normal. By evening, whispers had found their way into corners. She ramps like she's protecting joints. "Did you hear about the scar?" She warned an instructor about wind drift. You don't learn that unless you were trained somewhere else. And finally, somebody said the thing everyone was thinking. She wasn't always a private. No one said it with confidence. No one said it out loud to leadership. But the idea floated just above the silence, waiting. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was close to 11 at night. Late enough that lights across the yard were dimmed. Early enough that stragglers were still moving equipment. A few trainees lingered on the west side loading dock, stacking barricades. Private Mark Ellison stepped onto the second platform of a scaffold to unclip training netting. He tugged once, twice, then leaned harder on the strap buckle. The metal brace beneath his left boot shifted. The entire side rail jerked down. He pitched sideways, arms flailing weight dropping backward. Avery moved before Ellison even made a sound. Not fast, in a panicked way fast, in a trained way. She slipped forward, one knee lowering instinctively. Spine aligned, hips squared. Her hand caught Ellison's wrist, redirecting downward pressure so his momentum transferred into her center. She rotated his weight exactly 60 degrees inward. lowering him into a kneeling posture. The angle protected his shoulder. Her foot slid back, stabilizing his fall with minimal impact. He landed upright against her forearm. Not flat. Not twisted. No cracking sound. No bruising impact. Ellison blinked, stunned. I didn't. Even what just happened. You're fine, Avery said calmly. Check your footing next time. She stepped back, releasing him as if nothing unusual had occurred. She didn't look around. Didn't wait for thanks. She simply walked toward the equipment bins, picking up a tarp roll like nothing happened. But someone had seen it. Captain Joel McKinley had been standing near the corner of the loading dock, reading task completion logs. He was a man who rarely reacted visibly to anything, not because he lacked emotion, but because he'd spent enough time shaping recruits to recognize when a moment mattered. His eyes tracked Avery's movement long after she turned away. He knew exactly what she'd done. That maneuver wasn't just a reflex. It wasn't something you learn after one cycle of Army combatives. It was a black level transition taught only to combat instructors who'd served in real kinetic theaters. The motion was textbook down to the stabilization angle of her knee and rotational torque applied on release. A maneuver like that is only used when someone is broken, falls under unpredictable terrain, wet rooftops, unstable metal, zero visibility alleyways, open-air platforms and contested zones, and Avery executed it, unconsciously. McKinley's heart sank not in fear, but in recognition. He stood there longer than he meant to, gaze fixed toward her silhouette in the dim training lights. That woman wasn't learning to survive. She had survived, and whoever trained her hadn't done it here. He didn't speak of it, not immediately. He waited. He watched. The next morning, quiet murmurs drifted across the platoon. Ellison told someone what happened. That someone added a detail. Another exaggerated it. By noon, a story had formed. Maddox caught him midair. No, not caught. Stabilized. No impact at all. Like she knew the angle before he fell. Rumors didn't escalate into confidence. They sank into silence. People didn't laugh anymore. They studied. During chow, some soldiers avoided sitting near her, not because they disliked her, but because they suddenly questioned what they'd assumed to be true. When Avery walked up the barrack stairs, soldiers stepped aside, not deferentially, but instinctively, like their bodies understood something their minds couldn't articulate. McKinley didn't confront her. Instead, he went into personnel systems and pulled up her record. His access wasn't unlimited, but it was enough. Her file wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. Half her early service timeline was redacted. Training schools listed without instructors. Completion reports without performance scores. Deployment credits listed but no location codes. Transfer paperwork signed by officials outside standard divisions. A rank reduction documented but under sealed justification. He stared at the screen longer than he should have. He didn't print it, didn't download anything. He closed the file after one final look, knowing that whatever was erased wasn't erased by accident. It was erased because someone higher than him didn't want her past connected to her present. McKinley decided he wouldn't expose her. Not yet. Not publicly. Instead, he did something strange. He waited. He watched every drill, every run, every routine. He saw her intentionally allow failure, not dramatic failure, but precisely measured incompetence, just enough to never stand out. She wasn't bad. She was pretending. And McKinley knew why people pretend. Not because they lack ability, but because someone told them not to be seen. The others didn't realize that the fear they felt wasn't about her skill. It was about what her skill implied. No one hides excellence, unless it was once required in a place where visibility meant danger. Then came the evaluation meeting that changed everything. General Marcus Helverson stood in front of the assembled companies, arms folded behind his back. The evaluation summary was meant to be routine performance averages, leadership notes, training projections. But it never was routine when Helverson spoke. Before we begin, he said, we need to address a recurring weakness in this battalion. He pointed to a chart displayed on the projector. Performance curves, time logs, red marks clustered in one column. This is what happens when standards bend to accommodate failure. Then he spoke her name. Private Avery Maddox, step forward. She walked forward calmly. Hand still, posture correct. She stopped exactly where regulation required. Halverson continued. This soldier represents everything we must correct. Hesitation under pressure, inability to lead, dragging team performance downward, sir. A voice interrupted. Everyone froze. Captain Joel McKinley stepped out of formation, poster crisp, eyes locked on Halverson, without a trace of challenge, only certainty. With respect, McKinley sighed, before these statements are finalized. I need clarification on one matter. Halverson frowned. State your concern, Captain. McKinley turned to Avery. Not loudly, not dramatically. Private Maddox, were you ever credentialed under the Raven Sea Combatives program? A single sentence. That was all it took. Avery didn't move. Didn't blink fast. Didn't react with surprise. Her answer came the same way everything else came from her. Quiet. Plain. Honest. Yes, sir. The air in the hallway changed temperature. Halverson's expression faltered barely, but visibly. The major holding the evaluation clipboard stopped taking notes. A few soldiers whispered, "No way." She said yes. Raven Sea? That's real. Everyone knew the name, not because it was openly taught, but because it was whispered like myth. Raven Sea wasn't regular combatives. It was a clandestine program tied to Offer Corps deployments and rapid response elements, never listed on unit rosters. The known facts were few. Only 27 people ever qualified. Each served in operations that didn't officially exist. None of them were assigned to normal training units afterward. And Avery Maddox squired slow, overlooked Avery had just confirmed she was one of them. McKinley didn't add anything. He didn't defend her. He didn't explain the significance. He simply stepped back into formation, letting her answers stand alone. Silence collapsed over the room. Halverson's jaw tightened. His face lost color not dramatically, but in the way a man loses control of the moment he believed he commanded. Finally, he swallowed and cleared his throat. Very well. Proceed. But the damage was already done. 300 soldiers no longer saw Avery as weak. They saw her for what she truly was, someone who didn't need a reputation to have earned one. Someone whose silence hadn't been insecurity, but restraint. Closing the mess hall looked identical to the day everything began. Same metal tables, same overhead lights humming, same burnt coffee smell. 300 soldiers filled the space. Avery Maddox sat in the same spot at the end of the fourth long row, alone again. She lifted her cup. The bottom edge caught a ridge on the tray. It tipped. Juice spilled across the metal surface. The sound was subtle, but everyone heard it. The memory of the first spill rushed back like a cold gust. General Halverson stood near the entrance, still burning from the revelation that had stripped his authority bare. He walked toward her without hesitation, boots striking sharply. You will stand, he ordered. Avery rose without conflict, posture neutral, breathing steady. He reached for her wrist's strong grip, intentional pressure, ready to yank her toward humiliation again. 5 seconds began. 1. Avery's feet repositioned. Her stance shifted from passive to vector balance, her weight anchored through the ball of her right foot. 2. Her free hand rose, redirecting. She inverted his wrist with minimal effort, applying torque that folded his elbow inward. His body weight leaned forward unintentionally. 3. Her hip rotated efficiently. She didn't pull him. She allowed his own forward lean to accelerate. Simple leverage exchange, honed through repetition no one here had witnessed. 4. His shoulder collapsed. His balance broke. The room saw a general fall faster than anyone could process. He hit the tile floor hard, breath bursting from him in a painful choke. 5. He tapped. Not in anger, not in pride, in panic. His palm smacked the floor twice. Then again, his face flushed, jaw clenched, air cut off beneath the pressure she controlled with precision. Not enough to injure, just enough to end resistance. Captain McKinley stepped forward. Release him. Maddox. Avery disengaged instantly. She stepped back, posture neutral, arms at her sides, exact regulation stance. She didn't gloat, didn't glance, didn't wait for validation. Halverson tried to speak, but only a weak rasp came out. He rolled to his elbow, breath, trembling, unable to stand without assistance. Silence spread across the hall. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered insults. Every soldier at every table felt the same truth settle over them. This wasn't dominance. This was restraint. Avery could have shattered bone, dislocated a shoulder, crushed a larynx, but she didn't. Her control under pressure revealed experience. Her restraint revealed character. Private Elisande, same one she'd saved near the scaffolding, slowly came to attention. His right hand rose to brow level. He saluted her. Not because of rank, not because of protocol. Because of fact. Another soldier followed. Then, another. No command issued it. No officer endorsed it. It was respect that emerged on its own. Halverson remained on the floor, un abito raisi, watching the gesture that was no longer his to claim. Avery returned to her seat, as if nothing happened. She didn't look at any of them. Respect wasn't what she wanted. It was simply what she no longer needed to hide. She didn't stay long. She cleared her tray and walked outside while the mess hall was still frozen in disbelief. She returned to her barracks locker, retrieved a sealed envelope that had been waiting for authorization, and signed the necessary line. Voluntary reassignment. A quiet escort arrived the next morning. A nondescript government vehicle with no unit markings. She stepped inside without ceremony. No bags. No speeches. No final formation. She moved back toward a world unseen where credentials weren't spoken, names weren't shared, and missions didn't form on public rosters. Fort Redwood changed without announcing it had changed. Disciplinary methods shifted. Personnel evaluations included screening for concealed advanced credentials. Peer review structures moved from punishment first to capability recognition. No official memo carried her name, yet everyone knew why the reforms existed. Inside classrooms, new soldiers were told a version of the story that always began the same way. Once there was a private, everyone ignored. Instructors recited events with measured respect: how she moved, how she didn't react, how she never asked to be seen. None embellished the takedown scene because no embellishment was needed. The facts alone held weight. She didn't attack. She didn't retaliate. She neutralized and then released. Real strength is not loud. It is not cruel. It is not desperate to be recognized. It waits. It watches. It carries itself like something earned, not borrowed. And when asked to stand without threat, without pride, it simply stands. If you saw someone today who looked quiet, overlooked, unsure, what would you assume? Would you see weakness? Or would you pause long enough to realize there might be more behind their silence than anyone knows? If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. These stories keep courage alive across generations, reminding us that strength isn't always loud and heroes rarely announce themselves. Drop a like if this story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Salute to all who served and those still carrying scars we never see.